you. Thanks for tuning into the Waiting List podcast. I'm Long Long.
I'm Daniel.
And I'm Jacqueline. And we are three watch friends with a healthy obsession for watches.
So sit back and relax with us while we chat with collectors, industry giants, and share some good vibes. Welcome to the pod, guys. And today I'm joined by someone you guys are probably very familiar with. It's Dave from the Scottish Watches podcast. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you all, guys.
Right.
Hi, nice to meet you.
We've just come straight from an hour and a half recording on your podcast and pretty much like gone straight into our podcast here on the Waiting List podcast, which I got to say, it was a complete laugh talking to you and Ricky. How are your energy levels doing? How are you feeling?
It's Friday. I'm holding up. I've not had to resort to any prohibited substances at this point, so all is good.
Right. I think there's a high chance that our listeners have already listened to your podcast too, Dave. But for those that somehow don't know about your podcast, because you're already like 300 episodes in, how would you introduce your podcast in your own words?
How would I introduce? So Scottish Watches is the podcast, and how would I introduce Scottish Watches? So the best way to describe it is we take quite an irreverent look at the watch community, watch collectors, brands, products. You know, we don't specialize or niche in any certain area. So we could talk about new releases, we could talk about stories, we could talk about collectors, we could talk about a broad spectrum. We're also very good at getting dragged off topic as well. And we've got a kind of light-hearted touch to stuff. We don't take things too seriously. That doesn't mean that we're kind of out to get people. It's not a hit job by any means. It's just there's a TV show in the UK, I'm sure it's globally syndicated though, Top Gear, the original Top Gear, which was kind of a car show that had this slightly kind of cheeky, chappy, light touch to it. So it's a bit like that, really. And it's about watches as the main topic and any other little avenues that we decide to disappear down. And yep, we're 300 episodes deep now, 2 episodes a week. Typically we do a Monday, which is a reprise of the previous week news, watch releases, big hitting stories, what wonderful scandals have happened in the watch world. We talk about that. That's really just myself and Ricky. Then we typically on a Thursday have something with a guest, might be a collector, interview someone, or a brand, something that's maybe got a bit more of a kind of focus to that episode. That's our general format. And we've been going for 300 episodes, as I say, and we will be 3 years old just in the turn of the year. So just after the turn of the new year, we'll be 3 years old. And that's basically what we're about. So similar to you guys, enthusiasts that like to talk nonsense.
That's great. And I know in terms of watches as well, the podcast is, you know, you're someone quite active in the community because you actually set up like Red Bar UK, you're in charge of that. But before we go into watches, let's start this back because you don't come into the watch industry, you don't work in the watch industry, you actually come from the bicycle industry. And so do you mind actually sharing how you got into that kind of industry? Because I don't think many people would have.
So I as you know, when you're young, you know, your parents will guide you to usually some sport just to try and get you engaged in, you know, sport or a decent healthy lifestyle. And you know, cycling was my thing. I enjoyed riding my bike. I also was a teenager when the kind of whole mountain bike scene globally began to really take off. And I got, you know, quite into basically mountain biking, predominantly for fun and just, it was good fun and exercise. And between myself and some friends, we were riding together. And in much the same way as, you know, watch clubs and such, like we put together a kind of bike club where we would meet up and go out riding and, you know, things like that. So that was really from the age of 13, 14 kind of age. And there was quite a kind of good grassroots kind of competitive scene as well. So there was, you know, local racing at a kind of amateur level that I raced in mountain bikes. And, you know, I was fairly competent and really stuck with it. And for a period of my life, it was quite a serious thing. I never let it, I never let it, my parents never let it, a bit of both, you know, get in the road of like an education and just, you know, doing the don't drop out of school, don't drop out of university. So I very much went through my high school, through university, but was always very active in cycling, both competitively and just as a lifestyle and a hobby. And it's a little bit like watches. It's quite all-consuming. It's like if you're in, you're in, and it's a lifestyle as much as just a sport. So really, that was that. How I get into the industry side of it really was, I went through university with a broad plan that I was going to go into education or academia, whether looking to teach at high school or university level. That was kind of where my life was lining up. After I did my undergrad, I did my postgrad in education. So I did all of that, and that was still very much where I was going. And then really what happened was a good friend of mine from cycling who worked in the industry said, I'm moving on to a different role. Do you want my job? I was just kind of coming out of my postgrad at that point, and I went, money, that sounds good. Yep, that sounds interesting. It was the weirdest interview ever. It was a sit down with a coffee with a couple of folk. You like bikes? I like bikes. Do you like bikes? I like bikes. Do you want a job? I'll have a job. Thanks. Done. And that was the beginning of actually.
Sounds like a good interview.
It was the weirdest thing. I expunge lots of info. Like if it's no use to me after a few years, I just go, I'll get rid of that. If I need to know it again, I'll go and look it up. But I can still remember some of the exact phraseology and questions that were asked in that. And it was like, it was things like, I can remember being asked about what is it you think you'll focus on and what products. And basically what they were saying was the premium product's not what actually makes the money. It's the grassroots stuff. It's the bread and butter is made by the everyday product. It's not the sexy product that actually pays the bills. And I can remember this vividly, but that was the start of 24, 25 years of my career in the bike trade with one company, believe it or not, which a lot of people, especially younger people, nowadays find amazing.
It is actually, right? But I want to go back because you raced kind of very competitively, almost like a pro athlete level. Kind of exercise actually plays a big role in all three of us here. What was your regime like when you came to training, and also your diet? How strict were you on that? And what kind of stuff were you eating? And how often was your training? I've always been fascinated by what pros do.
So what I'd say is I'd say I didn't ever turn full professional because, that would have taken a commitment, as in you drop out of other things in your life. And I just, for various reasons, decided that wasn't for me. And I was never, to be honest, biggest picture was I was never good enough to be fully pro. But I definitely adopted the lifestyle. I wanted to be as good as I could be. And that does involve certain sacrifices. So, I did train a lot. All of my spare time, all of it was riding a bike, whether on the static trainer or just literally getting miles in my legs and riding. So that took up a huge amount of time. And it does take quite a lot of discipline when it's cold and wet outside to say you're going out and you're doing it. And that's it. You can't go, oh, it's a bit cold, I'll not do it. So, I got into a mindset, and it's just more a regime and a kind of a lifestyle, and you get into the rhythm of it or you don't. And if you don't, fitness is hard fought for and easily lost. And it's one of these things where you just know if you miss 2 sessions, the next time you're racing, you will know all about it. So, I just basically trained and trained and trained. Right. And in terms of diet, I was quite a fussy eater as a child, which was weird because my mother and father didn't let me be fussy. You ate what was put in front of you. And if you didn't eat, you were hungry. And it wasn't what you did or what you didn't like. I can still to this day, there was 2 vegetables you were allowed to choose as a kid that you didn't need to eat. Everything else, you ate what was put in front of you. But as a kid, I wasn't into red meat. I liked white meat, chicken, such like, and pastas. And as I became older, moved out home, I then kind of moved into this very protein-based, white meat-based regime. And it was quite a limited, specific diet that really I ate for fuel. I didn't eat for pleasure pretty much at all. Wow. I didn't think, I'm going out for X or Y. I just thought, that's got a calorific content or a protein content or this or that. And it goes, brilliant. Yeah. And actually, weirdly, the more bland it was, the better. because you didn't need to think
Okay,
about
weird.
it. You didn't have to debate with your body about, do I like it or do I not like it? You just, it was bland and it was very meh. But you ate it and it did exactly. It's a bit like, Futurama, where like robots just eat a tablet and that's it. It's like that kind of narrative.
Yeah.
And I did that and it served a purpose.
So you actually touch on something that goes on to my next question, which is you can have a talent for something, right? But it's the dedication in and out and the sacrifices you make and the mental side that makes like a winning athlete. Like, how do you develop that? You mentioned you see the rain and what makes you consistently do that day in, day out for not just 3 months, for a few years, like just dedicating yourself to that. And also, they see with football, I'm a massive football fan, right? Or, if you're in the US, a soccer fan. And it's the people that really can sacrifice everything that actually make it to be the top pros. But not everybody has that mental capacity to do it. So what do you think, is required?
I think that's quite a wide-ranging question, to be honest, because I think a lot of people assume that it's just about the kind of dedication and ability to focus yourself on that. And actually, for sure, that plays quite an important role in anything in life, whether that's sport or career or a profession. Like if you want to advance as far as you can, you need that mental discipline, focus, and kind of dedication and drive to get there. I think in sports, though, when I was younger and racing, which is, I stopped racing 20 plus years ago, but when I was racing, it wasn't nearly sport in general, but certainly most sports, cycling, it wasn't nearly as scientific as it is today. Sport today is a whole different world. I wouldn't want to be involved necessarily in the, kind of active racing side of things nowadays, because it's so honed and it's so scientific in many ways, where it's about those tiny little differences in physiology that are the difference between whether you're decent, very decent, or professional. But back in my days, I think dedication and commitment were a much bigger percentile of your chances of success than they are now. If you could have two people, one who's definitively more physiologically adept than you possibly, but you're way more committed than them, you will do better than them, because commitment is important, but it played a bigger proportion of the overall package. I think it's still important, but nowadays it's less important than it was, because there's many other facets, whether it's science, chemistry, physiology, sports science, and just general advancements in sports science that just didn't exist then, that allow people that, have that edge. And the elite level now is like entirely different to what elite was when I raced. I look back and I think, you had to be committed and dedicated and you had to put your mind to it, but you still could be a person. You still had a bit of you about you. Nowadays, to be honest, most of them are almost roboticized. It's like so clinical now that you're no longer a person, you're a thing that's made to perform. It's more like a Formula One engine. It's how can we fettle this to make more out of it? And I think it takes a huge amount of personality. There's not really a lot of true personalities that you used to see in sport that you see nowadays. Much more, there's much less in the way of, persona. You could get someone that was a average to decent athlete with a personality that would make them successful. You just don't get that nowadays. You can have all the personality in the world, but if you don't tick every box, and you see that in things like the Olympic programs, some of the best athletes in the world don't get selected for Tokyo because they tick 99 out of the 100 boxes, but they didn't tick the 100, therefore you're not going. And you're like, these are the absolute best athletes in the world, and dedication and commitment don't come into it. It's performance. And that's, I find that quite sad. I think that sport has become very sanitized and clinical and white room. And that for me takes a lot of the fun out of it. You don't get John McEnroe's anymore, where you're watching Wimbledon and some guy goes mental and smashes a tennis racket on the floor. You just don't see that anymore.
Well, what does that all do to like your mental health though? Like, because I'm thinking here as like an athlete, right? To get better, you're kind of like not satisfied with yourself ever, right? So that's the way you keep improving. And then if you say, let's say, have injuries that set you back, months, what kind of like mental issues do you face? You know what I mean? Like, you must be some dark places.
Yeah, I mean, for me, certainly, the older I get as well, it always has been, when I think back, important, but it was never necessarily at the forethought of my importances. But now it's something that's quite in the fore of my thoughts a lot of the time, is mental health. I think it's very important. For me, I can remember you definitely got the dark days where you did everything in your power and you just weren't performing and you just weren't getting the outcome that you want from it. And for me though, it was like sports and athletes, the more you develop and the better you get, the potential fall off the other end when you come out of it can be quite distinct. It's the old story: the higher up the ladder, the further you fall. And I think that has always been something in sport. Nowadays, I genuinely worry. There's lots of athletes in the last 10 years and currently, maybe not. I think the narrative is changing a little now, but over the last 10 years, you were a product, you were a thing, and it was take it in, churn it, spit it out. And there are, I think there's a real, societally as well, but definitely within sports, there's a lot of people that are going to have problems in the next 10, 20 years. And that's cumulative as well. It's not necessarily something that, it's not a light switch that you come out and you suddenly crash, but you try and hold this kind of mental narrative and then suddenly you just can't anymore and you fall. And the problem is that they will be so far out of these programs by that point in time, there won't be a support network under them. The support network that's needed isn't the here and now, it's the monitoring them long term. And I don't think we've seen anything like the proper problems that are going to come from mental health in sport for probably another decade. But that's my thoughts on that one.
I'm going to bring in Long Long and Jacqueline now because they've been waiting.
Oh, okay. So I have a few questions. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I agree with you on a lot of points. Let's just quickly touch on the topic of mental health while we're at it. Like, I agree 100% because I used to swim competitively, and I'll like touch on that bit a little bit like after this. But first of all, like, I was just amazed when I was watching the Tokyo Olympics, and the American woman gymnast Simone Biles, like she
yes,
actually actively was saying to the public that, hey, I need help or I need time, and that kind of created this global support online like support group, right? And then a lot of retired athletes voiced out their own stories. I thought that was something refreshing, and never thought it it was something that would still happen in 2021, but I'm so glad that it did because it is such a serious problem. I shouldn't say problem, like an issue that people should pay attention to. So I absolutely agree on that. And also, people kind of forget that with sports, it's like a youth's profession, right? You have to reach a certain age and then you're kind of forced to retire because, again, everything is performance based. So that psychological trauma that because it is such an emotional thing when a pro athlete retires, right? And if they don't have that support system once they get out of the game, I can only imagine how difficult it is for someone to dedicate their entire life, and they might compete in 2 or 3 Olympics because they're once every 4 years. And finally they retire due to age. And it's like, okay, I've trained so hard my entire life for this idea almost, and I'm limited by my age, which, you know, it's the reality, but it is sad that you can't move on in spirit because you are blocked by your own physical age. So it's like the debate, okay, where does sportsmanship spirit end and like physical reality start? Like it's kind of disappointing and sad to see that. And my final point is I used to swim, so it was very straightforward. How do you qualify for semifinals, and how do you eventually qualify for finals? It's the time, right? I think swimming and I mean races that focus on time, like, is in some ways a lot more simpler than team sports, because I mean, there is only one right answer, right? You are judged on who is faster by 1 millisecond, even. So we can qualify. It doesn't really matter. Like, spirit isn't as obvious in individual races. Whereas, but that's different, like with relays and stuff. Whereas, like with volleyball and basketball and soccer and whatever, I'm not familiar with them, but I'm a fan of volleyball. And I remember watching in volleyball, women's volleyball is a big thing in China. And I remember watching you know, the head coach announcing the rosters for Tokyo 2021, and only, you know, a certain 12 people made it and the others didn't. And that made me think, because they documented the entire thing. Women's volleyball is huge in China, so they were able to film the entire thing, and you can just see that. First of all, I don't know if the athletes knew beforehand that it was announced, or I mean, they probably knew it was going to be filmed, but you can see in their eyes those who weren't chosen, and some of them were older athletes who've been with the team for longer. Like, the expression on their faces, that they didn't cry, they were laughing, actually. They were like clapping, right? And they were like, oh, I'm so happy for the team, you know, like this is great. But I remember, like, a few athletes, they were 1 year before retiring, and this was going to be their last Olympics ever. And you can just see, like, the complexity of their expression. And that made me feel like, you know, with team sports, you just, plain and simple, you sometimes just have to take one for the team. And taking one for the team doesn't necessarily mean stepping up and being in the limelight. It means stepping down and giving up your space for some other people. But it's just, I don't want to go very deep into it, but it's just so, like, yeah, it is. I
think what you say there is really interesting as well, though, because you're right. There is a very different dynamic at play, and there's pros and cons to both. As a soulless athlete, swimming or running or something like that, you are ultimately responsible for your own destiny. You're either good enough or you're not. Simple as that. Yeah, and you're compared against your peers or others, but ultimately, when it comes down to it, the end result is entirely on you. But also the downside of that is there's no support network. You are your own support network. At the end of the day, if you mess up, you've only got yourself to answer to. Whereas in good teams, there's the potential that there is the bigger support of the bigger team there that can see you through, because they have an empathy with you and understand that sometimes they're selected, sometimes they're not, and sometimes it's your turn, sometimes it's not. Which I've never been someone that does team sports. I just, you know, my siblings are massive into football, soccer for the, you know, the American audience or the non-British audience, but, you know, they talk about this team spirit and things like that, and that's just something that's alien to me because I don't partake in that. But then my other brother runs marathons, and he's exactly the same mindset as me. It's like, if I mess up, I beat myself up, and that's it. But I think it's very different in terms of how it makes you think about things.
Yeah, long.
Well, I have several points. There's a book called Atomic Habits that I think, Dan, you read it too, right? So there was an example about the British cycling team, and they just never won. They were really bad, right? And then
they were.
and they got this new coach, and then the coach had this whole thing where you just pay 1% every single time, and it went from even like whether they had hair on their bodies and like very little things. And it just kind of what you said just now about how people are like you look at the athletes and they're not seen as humans anymore, but rather like robots, right? Like you're just trying to improve a product. So I can totally see how as an athlete, you just lose it because everyone wants to be seen as a person,
Yeah.
right?
I,
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right in that, and that's mostly referring to when Sky became involved, and you had the Sky cycling team in Britain, and it was the marginal gains
Yeah.
episode, which is, as you say, these little bits. And to me, I think that in itself, the description of that, of the 1% or the marginal gains, it dehumanizes it even more, because to me, it's like the iterative update for your iPhone. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
there's 14.01. Oh, there's
Yeah.
14.02. Bug fixes. And you can almost see them trotting a human out and going, okay, you're now the 0.1 iteration. You're fractionally better than this one.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself is a problem. But that in
Yeah.
itself shows you that when you apply two things, money and science, suddenly you can, it's very easy to dehumanize people because you get the result. And for me, that's where sport is really difficult. And that's where this potential mental health time bomb is coming, is that it's almost pro elite sports in general are now so dehumanized that you've got a bigger and a bigger and a bigger pool of people that are going to get spat out at some point. And, you know, as you say, a professional elite career in sports might be as short as 5 years, as long as 10 years, give or take, at their peak level. The problem is they need 30 years of support after it to almost to deprogram them from that back to being some kind of balanced, regular human being. And that costs money and time, but there's no return on it. So it just won't happen. It won't happen. That's the sad thing about it.
You know how we keep talking about age? So when do you peak as a male athlete? Like what's the average age?
I mean, I'm not an expert in this by any stretch, but I think that's very sport dependent. I mean, for example, in power sports, so typically, your 100-meter sprinters and these kind of things, it's young. It's typically, mid-20s to early 30s. So it's quite young. Football, soccer players typically start young though, 16, 17, 18. They quite often, the good ones are identified and start to come up. And the really good ones, if they look after themselves, can definitely play well into their late 30s. So they can have quite a long career as long as there's no injury. But then there's other sports like distance running, marathon runners typically are older. Typically they work out later that they're good at running distance. And quite a lot of, like, my younger brother is, mid-40s, and he took up marathon running maybe 10 years ago. And he's running sub 2.5 hour marathons at elite level.
Wow.
And he's 45. He ran London last weekend and he was 2:29 with an injury. And he was I think he was 80th overall in the whole marathon. And you're like,
I'm working on it.
So yeah, I'm
working
with
it.
you. I'm with you. I'm working on the
happen.
idea of working on it. Never mind the actual doing. But I think it varies a lot. But again, you look at tennis players. Typically, they tend to have quite a. I mean, Nadal's a fair age. I mean, he's not old, but he's a fair age now for a pro athlete.
But so is Roger Federer.
Yeah, I think they're both well into their 40s, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I think both of them didn't really start to become names until probably in their late 20s, early 30s. They began to really climb that tree. Obviously, they've got 10 years, 15 years of practice and pulling through the weeds to get to that point. But, that's quite a long career.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that, as you were progressing through this journey of your passion at the time, something that you really love, bicycle riding, mountain biking, that you lost the passion for it? Because, when I heard your story, I thought, you know what, that's really great. You're really into bicycle riding since you're a kid. You turned it into a this amateur, semi-pro thing. and then you went into the bicycle industry, and then you know what, you came up with the advice is, you should be careful about turning your passion into something as your career, because is that something that you experienced? Because I've always asked you, you do so much for the watch community, right? That potentially, I'm sure there's a lot of opportunities that way for watches, but you refuse to go into watches, the industry, because you said to me some of the experiences you had in the bicycle industry. I'd like you to elaborate.
I think really what that comes down to is it's really like anything in life. When you do the same thing day in, day out, day in, day out, it becomes routine, it becomes rote, it becomes unexciting because it's the norm. It's, it becomes just blasé and just you wake up every day. When you do it for a long time as well, most industries aren't actually that sophisticated. Like, yes, medical research, that's a whole different kettle of fish, but most industries, finance, retail, product development, whatever, there is a finality to them in terms of like the learning spectrum, especially if it's in quite a niche area. And yes, things change, but we're well past, in most industries, we're well past those quantum leaps that you would maybe have seen through the Industrial Revolution and the invention of flight and all of these things. I often wish I'd lived, like, aside from things like the Second World War, that kind of 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that period of time, just everything was dynamic. And it's obviously most things are much more mature. And I think for me, it's, you fall out of love with something. In terms of love, for me, is the passion about it and the want to do it and the desire to see where you can go. And I think for me, you get to a certain point where you think, I've pretty much ticked all the boxes. I've not necessarily always been the best, but I've done as good, or I've done as well as I can do at all of these things, and I've done them all. And I can go back to the start and start again, but you do. But then once you've done that 3 or 4 times, you're like, okay, so I've done everything 3 or 4 times and tried to get a little better. Some of these I've not got any better, and some I've peaked out. And I think at that point, certainly for me, I'm driven by a challenge, something new. And, the challenge is always there. So if it was sales, every year there's a new target, every year there's a new budget, but it's the same game. It's like running up and down a hall and being told, okay, you can run from this end to that end in 10 seconds. And then the next time you have to do it in 9.99 and then 9 point. After so long, you just go, I've got as fast as I can go, and it's the same game. And it just becomes very, for me, mind numbing in a respect of there's no real vibrancy to it. And I think that's why, I've avoided ever moving into watches, for example, as a professional career. I think I would do it, but it would have to be in my terms, and it would have to be what I wanted to do. So basically, it would be up to me to create something that I thought I could bring to it. I wouldn't necessarily want to work for a brand and just do basically what I do right now with a different product, because I think very quickly, I'll use the word bored, but that, I don't mean that in a demeaning way, but I think I'd get bored of that even quicker than I get bored of my current kind of area, in as much as it's taken 25 years and you kind of get to a point where like, right, I've done it. If you move that onto the same thing with a different product, you're already 3/4 of the way down the road already. So you've got a much shorter, kind of narrative to it. Sorry, that cut out there. Someone was trying to phone. There's a much shorter narrative to it, if that makes sense.
Using your analogy of hallways, right? Do you think that you didn't change hallways fast enough to change the setting, and then you're running down a different hallway? I get your point about if you do the same stuff, So that's my first question. Do you think you didn't change hallways fast enough and you got too bored in that and stayed there? And the second question is, you mentioned in the watch industry. Okay, let's say I gave you what you wanted to do in the watch industry. What would it be?
I think you're probably right in that, yes, I probably in the grand schemes of it should have, thought about those kind of options and narratives, but you don't, because people are creatures of habit, and you stick with what you know and you stick with where you're comfortable, and that's a human trait. I think in the watch sphere, a challenge that is always something that appeals to me. And like, this will possibly sound arrogant because I definitely don't have the answers or all the answers, but you know, it's such a kind of male patriarchal industry that's very old school, and it's very, we've just always done it this way. We've done it this way for hundreds of years, so why should we change it? And I think to be involved in some way with being able to, you know, proactively and kind of for better change that narrative, but not, you know, on a grander scale, not like brand by brand or anything, but just actually trying to change the bigger narrative about anything from snobbery, which the industry is rife with, that's just how it is, to people's perceptions of the kind of luxury and, you know, how they tie luxury in with money and why that makes it better or worse, which is rubbish as well. I nearly said a bad word, but it's rubbish as well. Or, you know, whether it's the classic, you know, well, you know, well, you're a woman, of course you don't know how a watch winds, you know, and you're like, what? You know, it's like, why does this still pervade thinking in watches? It's like, you know, it's like almost back to the days of, you know, like, well, you're a woman, of course you can't go to work. You're like, you know, that narrative died out in pretty much every other industry decades ago. And it actually became completely unacceptable in every industry decades ago. And it still is quite pervasive within watches. So I don't know, something in there that was bigger, but then it's like that classic question, you know, how do you get that to a point of being, it sounds crass to say monetized, but how do you get that to a point where you could make a career out of it that allows you to earn a living, that allows you to have a nice lifestyle? But it's like most things in life, you know, the good cause is usually the one that doesn't pay. But you know, that's sadly just that's more testament to the society we all live in, I suppose, than anything else. But you know, I don't know. I've never really thought about it enough. You know, I, like you guys, I did the podcast, which we do it for fun, and you know, it's like we're not proactively trying to monetize it, but sometimes little opportunities come along that we look at or whatever that, to be honest, doesn't suddenly make us rich, but it allows us to fund the podcast that's not coming out of our own pockets. So that's fine. You know, we can work with that. But we wouldn't, you know, the problem for me is monetizing something like the podcast. At what point do you sell your soul? You know, that's the $1 million question.
A lot of women, sorry, Dan, I just want to say in Asia, a lot of women would hope that it could go backwards so that they didn't have to work.
Wait, can I just very quickly jump in? I recently was talking to some watch people, like weren't talking, they were messaging me, and I swear it's like one of the funniest things I've seen all year. They're like, I'm genuinely curious. Did you start liking jewelry before? How did you get into watches? And I'm like, why? No, I've never really been into jewelry before. Like, why did you think that I have to like jewelry before liking watches? Oh, it's just so rare to see a girl liking these watches. Does your boyfriend or does your dad like really love watches? Like, did you have someone guide your hand through it? And I was like, no. And they're like, wow. Yeah. So anyways, we're used to it at this point, right?
Yeah.
I think the thing is as well that something I'm conscious of is like, you know, you think, oh, you'll fight the good fight, or you think, you know, you want to become more enlightened, you know, and it's like, as a male, there's that dangerous territory. I'm not female. I can't think how females think. I can try and not even empathize. I can try and understand or get an understanding of how they think by speaking to women about how they feel marginalized or not included or excluded or whatever, or positives where they are included. But then it's that constant question of, as you've said there are absolutely some females who don't necessarily want the narrative that I think that they want pushed as well. So it's that kind of, you've got to be careful, because you walk one way, you stand on a landmine, said the other way, you stand on a landmine. You know, there's sometimes no winning, and it's changing narratives, and globally those things are different as well. You know, what some areas like and what other areas like are very different sometimes.
Right. So I'm going to have to take a hard right here because there's just no subtle way of putting it in, but we just have to get onto watches. Right. So like in your podcast that we did, right, you normally do a wrist check, right, in the first 10 minutes, and we ended up doing it right at the end. But you are actually a very big Speedy fan, right? And I know you have quite a few of them. Don't you think that there's too many limited edition Speedies out there? And secondly, like, is it the ultimate chronograph watch in your opinion?
So interestingly, why do I like Speedies? I like Speedies for a lot of reasons. One of my big geek things as well, from being young, from being like a kid, teenager, is aviation, like aviation space program. Like as a kid, I was like air show mad, go to air shows, watching all the planes, and the UK has always been amazing for that, because, you know, like the UK, especially during when I grew up, which was, you know, the 70s, 80s, you know, was the height of the Cold War, and you had all of the US bases and all of the British bases, and you know, it was just, from that point of view, from like planes and air forces and stuff, it was everywhere, and they used to have massive air shows with everything in it. So that was just, you know, the combination of technology and science and aviation and everything about it was a big thing for me, and as was space. And that's always been actually with me. That's been one of my, like, you know, everyone's got their dirty little geek secret. Are you a train spotter? Are you a plane spotter? And planes has always been the thing for me in space. And, you know, I get hugely into terrible. I get hugely into Apollo, for example, but then into Mercury and into, you know, all of the Gemini programs and stuff. And of course, Speedmaster comes into that narrative. And it wasn't the modern marketed hype, shall we say, about that. It was the genuine story of, oh yeah, you know, like timepieces, whether it was Belova or whether it was Accutron or whether it was Omega with watches. It was part.
But then you only need one, though. You only need one, right?
Exactly, but it was part and parcel of this analog thing, and, you know, like this really interesting time where the world was going from analog to digital, and, you know, that then came home to roost with watches, with analog going to digital and quartz and everything, albeit, you know, a good decade or 2 decades later before that actually hit. But it was that interesting era. So that's where I kind of have this connection as well with Speedmasters as watches. And, you know, I like that connection. And to answer your question, do they? Yes, let's be honest, there is too many. But interestingly, you'll notice they've worked this out as well, because they haven't actually done a limited edition for a couple of years now. You know, the obvious ones that you would have thought
their time, didn't they?
They did, but, you know,
milked it enough.
But you know what? I think that's also, you know, fair comment. But I also think that it's easy to think and say, that's the Swiss watch industry for you. It's glacial. You know, it takes them 10 years to work out they're not doing it right, and it takes them another 10 years to actually change it. And that's just the whole Swiss watch industry broadly thinks like that. Yep, there's some modern independents, your MB&Fs and your, you know, your Mosers and stuff that are a bit more agile and a bit more kind of forward thinking. But let's be honest, the stalwarts of the Swiss watch industry are pretty glacial. But I think they've realised that. And, like, you know, like the new Snoopy, for example, isn't limited edition. It isn't numbered. And that, you know, if this was a couple of years ago, you can guarantee you that would have been a limited edition Speedmaster. And even the 321 steel watch and things like that aren't limited editions. So I think the bigger, wider, old school Swiss watch industry is, all brands, I think, are slowly moving away from the limited edition, unless it's limited for a particularly good reason. And they're moving into more limited production and curated output, shall we call it? You know, like this kind of like, we're not going to tell you how many we're going to make, but it is limited, but it's not limited. And
I was just going to make that
I think
point,
I think you're beginning to see that as well. So it's almost a little bit of like, it's definitely a little bit of the same game.
Yeah.
Played a different way.
Thinking the same thing, but I just wanted to see your opinion, like everyone's opinion on this. Do you think that deliberately doing this Like if you look at a lot of the hyped up pieces, right? They're not limited. So everyone's just waiting
Yeah.
because it's not limited. So you're just waiting
Yeah.
and waiting. But if it's limited, you're like, okay, it's all sold out.
Yeah, I
Let's
can't
move
get it
on.
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see, it's interesting because again, that brings you back into this thing of is sold out really sold out? Where does that line draw? I think in very modern history, like the previous Snoopy, as we all know, they sold out very quickly. There was 1970, whatever it was of them, and they've gone, and that's it. And the value climbed like a rocket, which is a whole different topic. But that was that one. But there was lots of the other ones. I can remember, for example, the Project Alaska, which these days is a pretty sought after Speedmaster.
Yeah.
It was kind of it wasn't a huge amount of time ago, but it was 10, 12 years ago, I think, give or take. It was like kind of 2006, something around
Yeah,
about
I think
there.
it's 2006. Yeah.
That kind of neck of the woods. It came out again 1970 something issued, and they were all gone. And then the market began to pick up. I actually managed to pick one of those up in Omega AD in a box at its original price 4 years ago by complete fluke, utter fluke. Walked in, I was like, it's an Alaska. And I just assumed it was a showpiece or a museum piece or something. And I kind of said, it's an Alaska. Huh? I was like, why is it here? And they're like, for sale. I was like, sorry, what do you mean it's for sale? They said, it just arrived on our allocation. It's just for sale. Yes, please. Thank you.
Was
yes,
this like
please.
in the rundown part of Glasgow or something?
No, this of
like,
all places.
Coventry?
Of all places, this was Regent Street in London.
No.
Okay. But I have to agree with Long Long.
How much was it? Sorry, how much was it for retail? Because that watch now sells for like
4,200 it was.
Okay, and how much does that watch sell for now?
What people ask and what people get are two different things, but probably
what people ask
trading. In fact, they're easily trading in US 17 to 20, and in UK 12 to 15 type neck of the woods. And I would guess most are selling for low five figures would be my guess if they're complete with box. So it's just, but it's weird, isn't it? Like this hype that we're in, whether it's limited editions or they must have this or must have that, it really is quite recent. It really is only the last few years that's gone from it happened with a couple of pieces that probably deserved the hype to just lunacy. When arguably, well, not you, yeah, Rolex, let's be honest, of premium watches, they're the world's largest producer of watches, give or take 1 million pieces a year. That's the touted figure. Anywhere, I think, from 800 to 1.1 mil pieces a year. So they produce more pieces a year than anyone else as a brand other than your cheap Swatch watches or your Timexes or whatever, who probably don't even make that many, to be fair, but that's what they make. And when you just basically can't get anything that's made of the most basic material they make watches out of, and you have to pay 2, 3, 4 times it, that's just a world of madness as far as I'm concerned, and it's like the one thing that does turn my stomach and puts me off watches quite often. I don't intrinsically have a problem with a watch accruing in value, fine, but it has to be for a good reason. Rarity, material, if it's a precious metal watch and it gains in value because it's precious metal, that's life. Or, they've only made 2 or 3, or they're genuinely hard to get. But, for me, Rolex generally is it just bends my head. Or things like Patek Nautiluses. Yeah, it's rarer for sure than most Rolexes, but it's still not exactly rare. A stainless steel Nautilus isn't exactly a rare watch, but the fact that they command lunacy money, and then the kind of manipulation that goes on. So things like let me think, FP's youre, they arguably are rare. It doesn't make Chrono Blue. There's not huge numbers of them made. They're not super rare, but they're also not common by any stretch. But there's also, you can tell that there's been a narrative of pushing value high. It's very calculated and it's very manipulated as a market. It's not just natural increase by rarity or anything else. It's a game that's been played by people that are making money out of the narrative of pushing value high. And that's the world we live in. That happens in all things, paintings, whatever you want to name, handbags, etc., etc. But yeah, I find that a bit off-putting personally.
So my second part of the question, now I'm wearing the data graph today, but is the Speedy the ultimate chronograph watch in your opinion? And by the way, Longmon's got a data graph as well.
I wouldn't ever profess that a Speedmaster is the best of anything in a horological sense in terms of watchmaking. No, it's not. It's a very competent, very solid workhorse chronograph that does exactly what it says in the tin. Will do it for a long time. It's easily serviceable at relatively affordable prices, and you can acquire one without a huge amount of effort. You can buy a regular Joe Speedy, walk in the shop, buy it, walk out, and it'll, if you look after it, broadly speaking, it'll last your lifetime and you'll enjoy it, and it'll do what it says in the tin. But I think it depends how you define the best or good. Horologically, no, not by a long way. There's, for me, Lange for sure. Quite a lot of the chronos from Minerva, for example, are definitely playing in the proper upper echelons. You could argue things like the Moser Streamliner chrono. There's lots of stuff out there that, with, for want of a better phrase, have better horological putts, finishing, whatever you want to call it, the Jazz Vive, like this kind of thing that you don't get. But from an accessibility, durability, and kind of longevity sense, then you could argue it is one of the best, because it will consistently keep doing what it says in the tin under quite a lot of duress. You can buy high end and you just know that you need to be a little delicate, because if you're not, it's coming back to bite you financially and time-wise. So I suppose it really depends where your narrative sits in it. Yeah. I think for the everyman, it's arguably one of the best, relatively accessible, relatively affordable chronographs in the marketplace. Yeah. But then if you want accuracy by a digital watch, it really depends what your take on best is.
Right, Jacqueline, you've been waiting. What's your question? Sorry.
Well, my question was actually when David touched on the people manipulating the market to, make money and whatever. And I was just wondering, like, where do you, in your opinion, I'm genuinely curious, where do you see that going in the next 2 to 5 years? Do you think more players are going to be doing that? Oh, yeah. I'm not trying to answer your question.
No, not at all. And to answer the question, where do I think it's going? My honest answer is nowhere particularly good for most collectors, is the honest answer, because it's a bit like anything. There is a very small group of people whose sole interest is wealth creation. And it so happens that for them, watches is the medium that they've decided to use to do that. And, you only need to look at, things like, take the Chrono Blue, for example. It's a circa €25,000 retail watch. It's a lovely watch, no two ways about it. Is it worth 25 grand? Probably at a push, but at 25 grand, that's a retail price where people are already making a not unhealthy profit on making and selling that watch. Is it worth 70, 80, 90? Not a chance. But that's what they sell for. It just isn't. It just is not worth that money. In the same way as, this is an outlier and an extreme, but the green dialed Patek. 2 seconds, my earbud ran out. 2 seconds. Need to reconnect. Give me 2 secs. So,
yeah, no problem.
Here we go. That watch sold for, I think, including fees, etc., the best part of $500,000. Yeah. I mean, when even in anybody's world is that worth £500,000? It isn't. I think for me,
it is if I sell it.
I mean, it's the same old question. If you've got one and someone gives you £500,000, it's exactly. Like happy days, But I think from a broader good of the collector community, good of the watch collectors. It's it's going to alienate the vast majority very quickly.
Yeah, sure.
I think, where's it going to go? Good question. I don't think it's definitely not going to go away. There's too many people now realise there's money to be made doing it, so they're going to continue to do it. I think a lot of the independents seem to be very in at the moment. Whether that's your MBNFs, whether that's your Mosers, whether that's your youres and all of these other brands. Some of them are you see them coming to the fore, and there's definitely some that are beginning to build this, ridiculous multiple ticket price increase in value that there's not, to me, there's no justification for it from a rarity or even just the object. The object is not worth that amount of money, but then it's thrown back to what is it worth? What's worth whatever anyone wants to pay for it. So therefore someone paid that for it, so that's worth that. It's a bit like art, isn't it? But it's like when you get into this, it's getting into this really rarefied air where only a very, very small cliquey set of people can actually play in that area. And I think that's quite detrimental to anyone that wants to come up, because most people never, ever, ever in their lifetimes will get the chance to even remotely get close to playing in that pitch. Therefore, I don't think in the broader scheme of things, it's good for most people.
I just want to open it to the floor, right? Because I don't think we've ever asked this question, especially to girls, but would you buy a watch at premium? Would you pay the premium on a watch?
Yeah, I've always said I would.
Okay, so you would,
yeah,
if you like it, right?
Yeah, because I've always said if the ADs don't offer me a watch, right, I'll just silently walk away and be like, clearly I haven't made enough money for them to think I'm worthy in their eyes. So, okay, then I'm just going to go somewhere else and show them, hey, I bought it from there. That's it. Yeah.
Have you ever had that situation? Like, have you seen a piece that you would like and you have been tempted to pay the premium?
Yeah, but there's a limit to my premium. I'm not going to pay double for sure.
Oh,
okay. So in the boundaries, you'll pay effectively a service charge for convenience.
Yeah, and also just to it doesn't really make sense, but to me it's kind of like I can respect that the watch market is not ideal right now, but there's such a long history and I'm just like this tiny insignificant person in this whole game, and I'm just going to play by the rules. So my only thing I can control is going to make more money to buy the things I want to buy. And if this gets too much for me, I'm more the type of person that just walks away. Like, okay, I'll just buy another brand. Yeah.
But you see, I find that quite interesting, because that's quite self-deprecating, and also, like you're minimizing though your kind of impact. At the end of the day, watch collector, the watch community, is basically a hive of a lot of people exactly the same as you. That's what it is. There are people who have a ability to, whether you call it self-publicize, or they're louder, or they're kind of more brash, or they're more outgoing. But actually, you're definitely not any less than any of them. But in the same way, you're not necessarily any more than any of them. There is quite an equity there. And again, with a lot of these brands, a lot of the pieces that we like, we play in the game of, we like the fringe stuff in a lot of cases, the weird and the wonderful and the fringe. None of that would happen if it wasn't for all of the worker bees, so to speak, for want of a better kind of analogy, that just buy the stuff that they actually make money on, that allows them as brands to do the crazy, weird and wonderful stuff. Ford don't make GT40s for a laugh and to make money. They make GT40s because they sell an awful lot of Fiestas and an awful lot of Focuses that allow them to have vanity projects. I don't think that's any different in the watch world. And we get the benefit of that we get to see brands bring weird and wonderful things out that we want to play with and we want to own, because there's a huge underset of people that don't identify as watch collectors but want a nice watch. And I know plenty of folks that would never identify as a watch collector, and then they go, oh yeah, I've got 4 or 5 watches and I've got this and I've got that, and you're like, so basically you're a watch collector. Oh no, I'm not a watch collector. Well, they are, but
What
it
about you,
depends how you
Jack?
identify.
Okay. If I okay. I would, because this is how I think of it, right? Like, take a very simple analogy. For example, like if I want the Nautilus and I haven't spent a single cent with a paddock AD or a paddock store, in order for me to get that Nautilus at the AD nowadays, you would have to spend probably a lot more than 100,000 to be allocated a 30,000 or $35,000 watch, right? So that would mean, okay, I have to buy a bunch of not easy to sell models to even be considered and wait for that allocation. You might not even get it, right? You might have to even spend more, right? Depending on the sales or depending on the AD or whatever. So for convenience, I think I would just go out and buy it, because but that's under the like assumption that I really want it, right? Like I love it so much that I'm gonna go out and buy it. Otherwise there's no point, and obviously I wouldn't do that for a Nautilus. So but yeah, for those like really hard pieces to get in, I mean, you have to gauge the rarity and the quality, and then it has to tick a few boxes before you go out and get. I'll tell you which watch I'll pay resale for. I would 100%, and I'm slapping my like leg, because I had the opportunity to get it before it kind of went crazy, but I would 100% get the 15202 salmon dial, honey dial, white gold honey dial. That watch is trading like 200 grand now, and it retailed for like 70 or 65. But then when it first came out, right, you could find them selling for 85, 90. And I saw that, and then I was like, oh my God, it's so nice, but this is crazy. It's 25,000 above retail. Like, who would pay that? But now it's 200 grand, which I mean, I was watching a video by Teddy Baldassare on this whole paddock thing. He just made it like 2 days ago. And he said, the psychology of it is that—
Is this about Veblen Goods or something?
Yes, Veblen
Okay, I
Goods.
watched it. Yeah.
And it's fascinating because there are pieces like this, right, that come out and then people are like, it's trading 20,000 above retail. Like, I'm not going to go for it. But then suddenly people are going for it because it's 200 grand. And then his explanation is like, well, that's because the human psychology is like, oh, I can get stuff that other people can't. And even if I have to pay above in retail and 3 times the market value, the retail value, it still proves that I can afford it. And most people cannot. So it's like buying into the idea that, oh, I can actually afford this and you cannot. And I watched that video, right? I'm like, interesting. It's certainly like, should consider and learn about this, right? And then I was like, okay, I wonder who's doing that. Obviously, a lot of people are doing that. But then right after, I was watching another video by this internet personality in China. And he just bought the 40th anniversary Nautilus, the platinum one with the baguette indices. And literally in his intro of the video was like, hey guys, so I'm going to show you my new watch today. This watch and I have a funny story. When it first came out, I was able to acquire at this, and then it reached 300 thou. And then I was like, that's insane. And then when it reached 400 thou, I'm like, oh, there's no way I'm going to pay for it. And then he was speaking in Chinese, right? And then he was saying the equivalents like, oh, I can't stand it anymore. Like, I can't do this anymore. So that's why I went and bought it at 500 thou.
The insanity of human beings.
But you know what was his explanation? And this is so funny because he said it in Chinese, and in Chinese that actually sounds like funnier than if I were to transliterate it in English. But he's like, say there's a girl and then you missed out and she's with another guy. But you know that you missed out because she's with the other person. But with commodities, it's not the same, because even if you miss out, you can always buy it back. You just have to pay more. And in my opinion, it's not a matter of if it's worth it or not. It's a matter of if you like it enough. So that's why I went ahead and bought it at 500,000 when I could have bought it at 200,000.
Story of my life.
So yeah, Veblen Goods,
strange.
Everyone. And he was so, savvy. He was like, and this is how I pair it with when I'm wearing like a skater outfit, and this is how I pair it with like a suit and a tie. I'm like, good for you. That's exactly like a real life example of something I just learned 20 minutes ago. Thank you so much for enforcing that.
Jack. Like, you know that 15202 Samandara, right?
Yeah.
Would you quarantine a whole year in a Chinese hotel
No.
for that?
Because
watch?
it's not rare enough. I was offered for a trade. I mean, like, goes on to another topic we didn't discuss, which was, you can pay resell for it. But what about trades, right? Like, that's something I'm familiar with. It's something that, like, honestly, to me, it makes a lot more sense than going out and paying cash for it. Because if I had gotten something for 100,000, say, and then now I'm trading something, I'm trading that for something that's worth 200,000 on the market, even if that piece I'm trading with is like, okay, close to that, but in my mind, maybe it's just to me, I still paid 100,000 for it. So to me, might be weird, but to me, it actually makes sense to trade up. So I would totally consider like trading for it, but I would never pay outright cash for that watch, and I would not even quarantine because it's not rare enough, right? I just like it for the watch. But yeah, sure, like I'll pay resale, but then to me, like paying resale is the equivalent of, I mean, the psychology is to me the same. Like I would trade up for it. Maybe I won't buy it outright. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that this happens though. We obviously know the world of watches and stuff, but it's the same in everything. Sneakers is exactly the same. People pay 2, 3, 4, 5 times the list price for a pair of sneakers for no other reason ultimately than they want to be seen to be saying, I got a pair of these, and they pay way over the odds for it. So I think it's just one of the weird and wonderful vagrancies of how we think or don't think. Actually, is probably more accurate.
Before we finish this main interview with Dave, I actually got another question for the girls. Is obviously Dave's a massive fan of the Speedies, and he's mentioned that the story of the Moonwatch and his affiliation with aviation, it's very romanticized. Does that have no kind of resonance with, let's say, women? Like, are you just not interested in that? Because it's not a watch you guys really talk about, right?
It doesn't.
It doesn't target you guys, right?
Yeah, imagine
it doesn't resonate at all.
It doesn't. But then imagine we could pitch a story and tell them to make a marketing campaign around it. I can't even think of a single thing that would resonate with me.
Yeah.
I've always liked the Speedy. Like I like the original Ultraman with the switched orange hand, and obviously can appreciate the I actually searched up the Alaska and it's really pretty, the white dial. But I can't tell you why it doesn't resonate with me. It just doesn't. Like, it's not like I don't care for space. Like I love what NASA is doing, and the Juno camp, like everything they're doing is something that I actually pay attention to and I spend time reading up on. But maybe it's the marketing technique, or maybe it's, I don't know. It's just whenever I see a Speedy, it's just never spoken to me in that way. Whereas for some reason Daytonas kind of do, not much, but kind of. Like I have a Daytona because before I bought it, I couldn't like actually see myself wearing a Daytona, right? Like that's first and foremost. But for some reason, I just don't see me wearing a Speedmaster. Which is like obviously it's fine, right? But
funny because I in the same way, I just Rolex does almost nothing for me, full stop. I've got one of the new orange or the coral red OPs, purely because I like the colour of the dial. That's why I like it, because it's bright and it's almost like the anti-Rolex to a certain extent. But things like the Daytonas and the Pepsis, yeah, it's just because it's a bright, fun colour, which to me basically says everything that Rolex tries to not say.
Yeah.
But like the Daytona, it's a lovely watch. It is, but it leaves me completely cold, and utterly cold. Like if someone gifted me one, I'd be like, thanks. I don't think I would wear it. I mean, I just, and that sounds, terrible, but it just doesn't. It literally does nothing for me at all. It just leaves me cold. In the same way as lots of watches that are meant to be popular or meant to be cool just don't appeal to me in any way. I've got quite an eclectic taste, though. My taste can swing from ultra opposites to ultra opposites as well. And as much as I like Speedmasters, I don't buy Speedmasters because of the market narrative or because it's Omega. I actually like a lot of what Omega do. They've got a lot of watches that appeal to my aesthetic, etc., etc. But I've got watches from all sorts of brands, from Moser and Independence and Chaikin, etc., through to weird and wonderful JDM Japan issue only Citizens and Seikos and Grand Seikos and things like this. I've got no particular aesthetic that I'm drawn to, or no particular material even. Broadly not precious metal. I'm quite, I'm not even white skinned. I'm blue skinned. I'm like and like when you put anything like garish beside me, it's just exactly. It's not a good look gold to me. So I typically go for titanium or stainless steel because that I quite like that. But it's strange. Luckily for me, which is maybe a good thing, the vast majority of watches that seem to be trading on the resale market at ridiculous prices are ones that actually don't interest me, which is probably a good thing.
Are you talking about the watch itself or the story tied to the watch? Yeah, because the watch aesthetically is really nice. I mean, the dial is balanced, right?
Yeah,
no one can find fault in it. But if you're talking about the whole space marketing story, I was also thinking, so if you look at it from a psychology point of view, men really resonate with all these action movies where it doesn't make sense, like how the bike can land over, you can go from one cliff to another and land safely, kind of thing. Men,
I agree,
right? So men enjoy getting into a movie, getting into a theater and then having their minds escape to a different world just for a few hours. That's how they de-stress, right? Whereas women, we de-stress by talking and sharing. So I always think if you can, so for a guy to put on a watch, you're entering a different space. You're like, I'm a superhero. I'm this when I put on this watch. I feel something. But for women, how can you do something where they can put on a watch and talk about it with other women? So if they can get that and then market it, it will be like, okay, it'll work.
No, yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, I joke about this with Ricky on our podcast, is about, one of the running jokes is I don't watch them, but the latest Fast and Furious movie, every time we sometimes talk about movies in the podcast, and I just say, oh yeah, take the car in space, that bit, that really believable scene, where he's just shaking his head, and it's you're right, I think, as you would describe it there, I'm not untypically male in that I like an action movie, but I think my tolerance for the believable is probably nearer reality rather than I watch a Bond movie, if you watch any movie in Hollywood where they get shot, you're like, well, you would have been dead within 10 seconds and that would have been the end of it, but you have to suspend your belief in certain things like that. But there's certain things where you're just that's not how a helicopter works. And my kind of mindset just says nope.
I just want to end this main interview by saying, carrying on that little narrative you said about realistic things. So when I was a kid, right, I used to watch James Bond, and I noticed, he used to get the girl all the time, but then there seemed to be some resistance from the girl, and this was in the Roger Moore, Sean Connery times, right? And I noticed that the girl resists, but he just forced his way onto the girl.
Yeah.
And as soon as he got that kiss onto her,
he does.
As soon as he got that kiss onto her, He had
Yeah,
her.
yeah.
So as I was growing up as a kid, I was like thinking that's what you have to do. You have to force yourself on the woman, and then as soon as your lips lock, that's it.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
Somehow something happens,
aside
and
from
they
the
like
fact
you.
that I'm
And
pretty,
that is consent.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Luckily,
I was gonna say,
realized
I'm pretty-
before adulthood that was not the case. Right?
Yeah, exactly, Daniel. I think
Saved
the
me a prison
narrative now is
sentence.
I was going to say, I think that's got a very specific name. Yeah, and it's not cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's but it shows you how. I had this discussion actually with Ricky in a podcast as well, and we were talking about language and use of words, and the changing narrative of what you can and can't use, and how you can see that directly reflected in film, and it is behaviors and traits and language and everything else, and you can see that with the whole masculine kind of narrative.
James
And
Bond's actually particularly
luckily
bad
it is
for that.
Yeah,
luckily it's changing slowly, but it's changing.
I was actually going to ask you and Dan just now, like, because I know you're very honest on your podcast. And I think if a lot of, you know, how this whole narrative now with women being like, oh, you're not listening to us. Like, why is the watch industry designing this and that? Like, do you have to be super careful with what you say on your podcast?
I think yes is true, but then I also I think yes, but I think with me certainly, and I can only obviously speak for me, is I'm kind of I think I'm quite lucky, and I see myself as lucky in that I have my mother is a strong personality, and she's maybe ahead of the time's not the right way to say it, but my mum's not a feminist, but my mum is like, oh no, I'm a woman and I'm just as capable as any man, but she's not pushing a kind of feminist kind of agenda. She's just like, it's always been that way. And also one of my very best friends is a woman that is an academic and very very much understands it, and I've been lucky that I've been a combination of brought up with that, kind of soaked up in it, educated in it. I try to educate myself as best I can and get an understanding. So I like to think that I can speak quite freely, and whatever I say is broadly not going to come across badly. But it's a complex agenda, and it's a complex narrative, because I think it's it's two-sided, and there's lots of different avenues, and there's also different viewpoints. I think there are some quite strong feminist narratives and views on lots of things. Some of them are very right, but they're not necessarily right, and they're not necessarily what the majority of people think, in the same way as there's lots of guys that say X, Y, and Z, and they're not necessarily right either. As with most things in life, there's a middle channel that's usually pretty balanced both ways. But people like to, it's world, it's politics, it's religion, it's everything else. People do extremes. That's just it seems to be the way we've always lived as a species, and sadly currently it's more and more prevalent. It's you'd think we'd learn, but we don't seem to learn. We learn for like 5 years when we're mopping up the mess we've made, and then we go back to doing the same again. But we are our own worst enemy as a species.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that brings the end to the main interview. Now, we usually have a reverso round, Dave, where you get to ask us questions, but I think you asked enough questions. And plus, the two girls are due to come on your podcast, so you're going to ask them questions anyway.
Absolutely.
So I don't think we need to go through that anymore. And we're going to go straight on to the pump push around, which is basically just some questions which are not watch related. They might be watch related, just random questions, right?
Yep.
So here we go. Number 1. The habit you have that your friends and family get annoyed with the most?
Either clicking or not keeping my legs still, like fidgeting.
Oh, that's annoying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Annoying.
It even annoys me, and I still do it. But
if I see that happening at dinner, it's like my eyes on it. I'm like,
fidgeting, and
it.
I think my other one is people that are close to me, so like see me eating or whatever a lot. You probably won't see this, and this is obviously a podcast, but my nose has been broken multiple times from instances with falling off bikes, and I can only breathe through one. I can breathe I can breathe out through both nostrils just on one, but I can only breathe in through one nostril. So when I eat, I obviously keep my mouth closed because I'm civilized, but I'm quite apparently
a risk of asphyxiation every time you eat.
Apparently, I'm quite loud at eating, and I think it's because I can't breathe properly through my nose. So when I'm eating, I'll occasionally also breathe through my nose, which obviously makes it noisy. And I just sometimes get people that know me, or I just feel the eyes burning into the side of my head, and I'm like, am I eating too loudly again? I'm very sorry. I'll starve to death.
That's like me and my roommate, my college roommate. She doesn't eat loudly, but she chews her gum really loudly when she's stressed. And when I was a freshman, like when you're a freshman, you live in the tiniest room and then you kind of get upgraded. And then so like we would sit literally like right across from each other while working. And oh my God, I could hear her gum chewing even with my headphones on. So sometimes and we would have the laptops, right? So we wouldn't see our faces because we have the laptops blocking our view. So sometimes I would literally just slap my laptop and then just look at her. And she's like, I'm so sorry. I'm stressed.
A very short one in the same vein as this, but this was someone I used to work with who was younger than me, but actually, sadly, when they were younger, had quite a major heart issue and had a heart valve fitted. And
are we going to end up laughing at this person?
Oh yeah, you'll love this. This is brilliant. And you know, I was quite good friends with this guy. He was a lovely guy, and he worked in credit control, and he sat in the office, and it was a big open plan office, a proper big open plan office. Yeah. And there was like a couple of quite young new starts, like female young starts, and you know, like the whole story here that when you're young, you hear noises that you don't hear, and like for antisocial behaviour, they sometimes play really high pitched noises to stop youth congregating. So this young girl, she sucked up the bravery, and she went up to this guy and she said, are you ticking? And he kind of looked at her. He's like, and everyone's just looking at her going, sorry? She's like, are you ticking? And he's like, I've no. And then he went, oh yeah, can you hear my heart valve? And she was like, what?
Oh.
And he's like, don't get too close. He says, but just have a listen. And she put her ear down. She's like, that's it. And at the far end of the room, she could literally hear his mechanical heart beating. Which I always thought, I just think it's hilarious, but it's like every time we walked back, he would just walk past her and go, this still working.
Working. That's good.
I think with your nose, right? It's a something that London can make note of. If you need to break your nose now, have a biking accident.
Wow.
Why does she have to break her nose?
We always
because then it's always because she always wants to talk about getting it done.
Oh yeah.
But she's always
at this
worried
point,
about
I'm sure
it.
you're glad there's distance between you, because I feel there might have been violence if you'd been in the same room.
No, there wouldn't. There won't. Like, I think Lala doesn't need to get on a bike for it. She just needs to, like, because she's so poised in person, but then like if you meet someone that you hate and you want to break your nose, just fight them. Like, don't even just like let it out, just let it out. Don't contain it.
Instantaneous outcome.
Yeah.
Right. Number 2, anyway. What's the last thing you took a photo of on your phone?
Tell you. It's right in front of me. That's a very good question. I might have to sanitize the answer. That's not a photo I took. Photo roll. Oh, I know the last picture. It was a watch that. Are you aware of the Waco and the Revolution are doing a thing called the Pink Dial Project?
Yes.
Yeah. Which is obviously the auction's coming up in the next couple of weeks for global breast cancer awareness. And are you aware of the Glasgow brand Anordain?
Yes.
Who do the Fumidels. So I'm very good friends with Lewis, who is Anordain, who started Anordain, and got him into. They're producing a piece unique for the Pink Dial Project, and it was the final watch that was finished 2 days ago that I took a picture of, and it's stunning.
So
can you
show us?
So it is. This watch is a. This is not the best. It's actually a video, but let me see. I'll send you better pictures of it. But in fact, I know where there's a better picture. Give me 2 seconds. 925 sterling silver handmade case, and they've registered their ASSI mark at Edinburgh, and their ASSI mark is their logo, which is really cool. And they've done a proper silver linen dial with pink applique, and then it's enameled in a clear pink tinted enamel. And
Wow. I think
So it's really faint.
yeah, it's so
if you
faint, which I
if you
think-
have a look at, so there's, you can see the ASSI mark, the little light A anodine. But I don't know if you'll see it in these pictures. Let's see. Oh, you might see it here. If I zoom in, look at number 8.
Oh, that's really nice.
And it's because it's
That's-
directly opposite number 1, and 1 in 8 women get breast cancer. So it's really cool. And then the hands are handmade out of rose gold.
Oh, that's cool.
Wow.
It's really. I mean, there's a better picture. It's a really pretty watch. So
Very
yeah, it's a
cool.
really nice piece unique. So that was the last picture I took.
Nice. That's a good
cool.
answer. I like that. Right. Next one. When you make tea, do you put the milk in before the water?
Outrageous.
Yeah.
What kind of
What is that?
Neanderthal are you?
Yeah.
I don't do that.
So
Culture,
I can
Dan.
give. You see, I can.
I just
give
wanted
a
to make sure you
scientific-
weren't one of those people because you live up
No,
in Glasgow.
Yeah, I can give a scientific answer as to why you shouldn't put the milk in before the water, though.
Okay, you go on.
And this is on the assumption we're using tea bags.
Yes.
Yes.
So milk molecules are larger than water molecules, and if you put water on a tea bag, if you put milk in a tea bag, it blocks all the pores on the tea bag, so that when you then put the water in, it doesn't properly infuse.
Mind blown.
Science.
I've never had tea with milk unless it was milk tea.
Gosh.
So sorry, milk tea as in, and how do you describe milk?
Jacqueline,
Like
you
boba,
Neanderthal.
like boba.
Oh,
I've
no.
never had like you brew a cup of tea and then you put milk in it and then you just drink it like
What?
that.
You've never had afternoon tea?
Like no, I've never had that. Like even when I had afternoon tea, I would just drink the tea without adding the milk in. And then so I've actually never tasted. I mean, I think I know what it tastes like.
Yeah.
But I've never had that in its purest form.
You're
Oh,
going
you see,
to London,
tea-
right?
Yeah. Tea in the UK is quite a thing, but
Yeah.
tea in the west coast of Scotland or Yorkshire it's a
Religion.
lifestyle. It's way more.
Yeah.
It is religion. Yorkshire tea, and it's also, like the tea. If I buy the tea, I buy, like if we're talking just tea bag tea, I buy Scottish blend because it's specifically designed to work. Because Scottish water typically is much softer than water down south, and Yorkshire water, because most of the UK, Scotland, I'm sure you'll have heard of Loch Lomond.
Yeah.
Yeah, the famous huge freshwater body. That is the water supply for Glasgow. Glasgow's water it comes out the sky and it goes in there and it's piped straight through the water treatment, and that's the water. And there's so much water in Scotland, you don't even pay water. You don't pay for water in Scotland at all. There's so much of it. We're
I
a
didn't know
net
you- I didn't know
exporter
that.
of
I didn't know
water.
you didn't pay for water in Scotland.
No,
No
we
wonder
don't pay for
Adrian
water.
moved up there.
Wow.
Yeah. So no, but tea, you have to put the tea bag in and you have to stew it until you can stand the spoon upright in it, so that it's so thick and tarry that the spoon doesn't move. And then just a splash of milk.
Yorkshire tea, that brand, that's from Scotland.
No. Yorkshire tea, the brand, is from Yorkshire. That's actually from Yorkshire.
Okay.
And in Scotland, you get Scottish blend. It's called, which is very specifically Scottish. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. So do you have tea? You say like, do you have tea every day then?
Yeah, I mean, I like coffee as well, but I'll typically have coffee in the morning, and at lunchtime I would have a cup of tea, and I definitely have a cup of tea after my dinner at night
with milk in it.
That's actually not a lot, because I know a lot of people they go like 5-7 cups, man, a day. That's normal.
Oh yeah,
in England.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I used to drink. My mum's mum, my granny, she was what they called a tea jenny, and basically it meant that the teapot was always hot. You could get in the house at any hour of the day, and there was always a teapot that was warm with a little tea cozy on it. And like no matter when you went in, you could go in anything from 7 in the morning till 9 at night, and you would walk in, cup of tea, and tea would get poured, and it would be hot. So it wasn't even like she had to, but it was just she drank tea constantly.
I love the fact
think-
that a cup of tea is the answer to all problems in the UK.
Yeah.
It is,
It's like,
no,
shall we get a cup of tea
can-
on? Yeah, that solves the
exactly,
problem
get a
right
cup
there.
of tea. It's thinking tea. But it's also, I think, I always queried, where did this come from? And where it apparently came from was like, she was, my mum's mum was, she lived through the Second World War, and from the she was born in the kind of 20s, and that was a different time in the UK. There was poverty was a realer thing. Working class didn't mean you had an iPhone. Working class meant you just had enough money to survive. And tea, apparently they drank warm tea all the time because it makes you feel full. So if you drink tea all the time, you don't need to eat as much food, and you don't have the hunger pangs. So apparently they would drink tea because they didn't actually have excess food to eat. So, and that's where it came from apparently. But when I was young, I drank a lot of tea because I was with my gran a lot, and like I didn't have an option. You're drinking tea.
Right. Okay. Next one. Right. Also kind of similar. What goes with butter the best? Marmalade, peanut butter, or jam?
Oh, I see. This is another one of my rabbit holes. Are we talking salted? Are we talking salted butter or unsalted butter?
That's
And are we talking
I would
French
say
or English? Are we talking French
salted,
or English?
Salted.
Okay, salted. And are we talking French, proper French salted beurre? Or are we talking like that muck that they make in England that they put salt in?
Yeah.
I'm talking about muck.
Right, muck. So the answer, my ultimate answer would be none. It would be a good bit of bread and a good bit of salted butter. There's nothing better in life than that. I'm a bit of a pervert, so it would be peanut butter, because I definitely, a lot of butter and then a lot of peanut butter on the top of it, because to butter, there's never enough butter in this world. And then you don't spread butter. You cut slices of butter and place it on it, so you get as much butter as you can possibly get on it. This is also why the west of Scotland is the heart attack capital of Europe. But yeah.
I personally, I love marmalade. I love a good marmalade with my butter. Yeah.
Marmalade's a weird one. I wouldn't have marmalade in the house. I just wouldn't. There's definitely peanut butter in the house.
Nice.
There's definitely raspberry jam. But marmalade, if I'm away and I'm staying in a hotel and they've got a nice breakfast, the weird thing is I'll always do toast, butter and marmalade. I wouldn't do it at home, but I'll always do it in a hotel, and they will have peanut butter, and they will have Nutella, and they will have raspberry jam and strawberry jam. But I'll always go for, it's one of those little things that doesn't make sense, but I do.
Right.
Peanut butter is the answer though.
Next one. One dirty secret within the bicycle industry.
I'm not going to jail for you. Sorry.
Really?
One dirty secret. There's lots of dirty secrets about, substance abuse hasn't stopped to be a problem. Welcome to modern pro sport. Dirty secret. That's a good. That's
I think
that counts.
That counts.
That counts.
That'll count.
Yeah.
That'll count.
Yeah. Drug abuse.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
Right. The person you would love to meet within the watch industry, but haven't had the chance to do so yet.
Good question, because I genuinely have been really lucky and have met a lot of people.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
And that's a really good question. I think I could probably give you two. And one is VJ, who is the CEO of Oris USA, who I've spoken to him lots of time, done video calls with him loads of times, spoken to him on the phone loads of times, but not actually. I've been in the same room with him at an event in the States, but didn't ever get a chance to talk to him because of the night. And he's just a lovely person. So he strikes me as someone I'd quite like to just shoot the breeze about life with. Seems like a nice guy that I'd enjoy talking to. And who else? Actually, a guy called Nicholas Hoffman, who is the sales director for Moser. And the reason is I've spoken to him a lot as well.
Yeah.
But this will show you how small a world it is. One of my good friends in the bike industry, who is a guy called Neil Billsland, who has a shop in Glasgow of all places called Billsland Cycles, which was his father's. Through the vagrancies of Instagram, I was like, why does Nicholas Hoffman follow Billy Billsland Cycles? And why you know those weird intersections of this doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to Neil, do you know this guy? And he's like, yeah. I was like, oh, how? He's like, it's my cousin. I was like, sorry, what? And then there was a big long story then about how his mum's sister or brother married somebody from somewhere, and then they were here, and then they moved to Switzerland, and Nicholas was their child. And I was like, wow, it's a small world. So I'd like to meet him, because I was very lucky, and I got one of the very first Streamliner centre seconds, and between Edward and Nicholas, they arranged that for me, and just because we know people together, so it'd be nice to meet him. I think that's the two that I haven't met that I would like to meet and just have a chat with.
What's your favourite takeaway Chinese dish?
Oh, I'm going to be controversial here now, and this is funny. Have you been speaking to Ricky about this by any chance? Have you been speaking to Ricky by any chance? Because we actually talked about this the other night, genuinely.
I didn't.
And the conversation went along the lines of, we were talking about, Indian food and Chinese food, which are obviously two big staples in the UK. There's a lot of takeaways and good restaurants. And my thing is, I always like to sit in restaurants rather than takeaway, because it's generally fresher and better, full stop, but necessity sometimes. I would rather not have a takeaway Chinese and sit in. I'd sit in, and if I couldn't sit in, I wouldn't get a takeaway Chinese. I have almost never had. You've had Chinese takeaways that was okay. It filled me. It filled a hole, but it was never great. Whereas I've had amazing sit-in Chinese food, and that doesn't even need to be posh Chinese food. Just freshly prepared Chinese food. It doesn't travel, as far as I'm concerned. Whereas Indian takeaways travel better. So the honest answer is, I don't do Chinese takeaways. I just, if someone says, oh, let's get a Chinese, I'll get something else, because I'm not. But I love Chinese food, and we've got two great Chinese restaurants actually in Glasgow.
But is Chinese food in the UK or in Europe, is it European Chinese food? Because there's American Chinese food.
For sure, a huge amount of it probably is, in the same way as a lot of it's probably more hybrid. It's either been anglicized, or it's maybe a mix of Thai, Malaysian, Chinese influence type food. In the same way as most Indian restaurants in the UK aren't Indian, they're usually Bangladeshi or Pakistani with that kind of Indian influence. There are still some genuinely good Indians, and my favourite Chinese absolutely is a Chinese restaurant, because it's, I think, the lady that runs it now is the third or fourth generation Chinese from when her family came over. I believe round about the kind of late 1890s, and have been here and have had this restaurant, and it is proper Chinese.
I can shed some light on that industry, right? Because my parents were involved in that industry. So the original cuisine, right, actually was coming from Hong Kong. But then nowadays, obviously the offspring don't want to continue that on. And actually a lot of that, there's Chinese restaurants, Chinese takeaways has been taken over by Fujian, which is a province in China. So a lot of the way it's being cooked is really different to how the Hong Kongers cooked it. But,
it's quite like Indian food's so big, and especially in Scotland, the west coast of Scotland has a big culture of Indian food as well. But there's a lot, you'll get India's a huge country as well, and you get all the different regions, whether it's southern Indian or northern Indian. Most Indian restaurants in the UK are northern. They're creamy based chicken dishes predominantly, or biryani type dishes. Whereas there's some great southern Indian restaurants as well, which I really enjoy. But it's an entirely different cuisine. It's very different, and there's a lot of good variation out there.
We're going to go on to the next 3 or 4 now, because I want to know the answers to these. What's the quote that you live by in life? Is there a quote or a something your mother said or anything like that you kind of remind yourself?
I don't think I've got a specific mantra or quote of words that's something that I live by. I think it's more just a kind of mindset, which is just as twee as it sounds, it's a combination of don't be a dick or an asshole. Don't be an asshole, and treat people how you want to be treated. And I mean, it is. It's a quite common answer we get.
like
Yeah,
when
I
I
mean,
asked that question.
I think that's it, and I think my biggest one is probably, if you want a classic like phraseology, it's never judge a book by its cover, because it will almost without fail catch you out. And I think my favorite phrase, and it's not necessarily something you live by, but it's my favorite phrase, is assumption that pissed the bed and it blamed the blanket. That's the one that I could.
I don't think I've heard
like
that
never,
before.
Yeah, it's like never assume, never assume what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next one. What's one thing you wish to achieve by the end of the year?
To still be alive.
Okay. All right. That's very forward
by,
thinking.
By the end of the year, I think just broadly get to the end of the year and still be happy, I think, is the main one.
Okay.
It's a tough world out there, and it's just try to maintain some decorum of happiness.
We'll edit that answer out then. Right. The first thing you notice about someone.
Is that generic, as in anybody?
Yeah.
Whether they smile or not.
Okay. Good. All right. And the last one. What's the next watch you're eyeing up?
How long's your list? I've been quite lucky over the last few years and got a lot of what I want, and I'm definitely in a rationalization streak of kind of trying to couture it a little bit, because I'm sure you've all been there. It gets out of control, and it's just utter madness. I think a few for sure. The new Moser Streamliner Perpetual Calendar, yes please. That's something that's not terrible in any way, shape or form, although it is a big watch, so that I can't quite decide whether it's not. I like a big watch. I can't decide whether it's too big, because the center seconds I've got for me is so perfect. It's so perfect in size that I don't know whether it would just be a watch that would sit there in the box because you would just pick up the center seconds, because it's very similar aesthetically. So definitely that is floating about, certainly in my narrative. And something that I've been working on with Pietro at the limited edition and Chaikin, which is I'm a big fan of the Joker, which I've got, luckily the original Jokers, and he obviously did a very limited run of 13 Draculas a few years ago, which disappeared instantly, and we've commissioned 13 Night Draculas, which are Draculas that have got loomed fangs and loomed eyes, and it's in a darkened titanium case, and it's instead of being the kind of brighter face colors, it's very purple black monotone, and we're doing 13 pieces of it as well, and very luckily I'm going to be getting piece 1.
Wow.
That's so cool.
So,
his only watch is so
amazing.
cool this year.
Oh, it's epic.
Yeah.
Last year's was amazing, or the previous one with the loop as well was absolutely amazing, but this year's is it's a whole different level.
Yeah.
I think he is arguably he's one of the most inventive watchmakers currently operating in the planet. You've got your Roger Smiths, who are geniuses in their own right, but it's very classical. It's very, conservative, but very classical. And you've got your youres, and then you've got folk like, MB&F and stuff that are doing stuff. But I think for someone who's so disjointed from the Swiss watch industry and that kind of atmosphere, to be operating in Russia, in relative isolation to that, and coming up with the stuff he does, I think is like, when you look at some of the stuff like the Mars watch, it might not aesthetically be your thing, but when you actually look at what he's done to make it happen and the synchronicity of it, he is a genius when it comes to designing movements to do what he wants to do. So, I've got a lot of time for what he does.
Right. Well, that brings the end to the podcast. Thank you, Dave, for being such a good sport and answering everything.
Thanks for having us.
If you enjoyed the podcast, subscribe and follow us at the Waiting List Podcast on IG, and you can obviously find us, Long Fun and Jacqueline at A Dose of Time, and myself at Mr. Daniel Sum. And you can also check out Scottish Watches on their IG account by the same name, and you can check out their podcast on Spotify and all the Apple, I guess, and Google. Is that
All
right,
the
Dave?
usual channels. All the
Yeah.
usual channels. Yeah.
So we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
As always, thank you for listening to the Waiting List podcast.
We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. And if you have any questions,
Comments.
Or feedback.
feel free to reach out to us at the Waiting List Podcast on Instagram or via our private accounts.
We'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.